is valuable. I'd like to call to order the RTA Audit, Safety, Compliance, and Real Estate Committee meeting. Roll call, please, Teresa.
Mayor Kumar,
Here.
Ms. Welch,
Here.
Ms. Mertzman,
Here.
Ms. Pachetti, Mr. Sleesman,
Here.
and Mayor Weiss.
Here.
You have 5 committee members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. In front of you, you see the February 21st, 2024 minutes. Are there any edits or comments on those? If not, is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mayor Weiss.
Second, Mertzman.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Next item we have is the internal audit report, presentation of the first quarter 2024 internal audit activities. I'm going to turn this over to our Executive Director, Tony Garofoli. And before you do that, Tony, I know some recent correspondence. We've had some promotions and some certifications, and would just love to hear more about those.
Thank you, and good morning, Mayor Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, Ms. Birdsong Terry, General Manager, CEO. We had a couple achievements in the first quarter. One achievement is the promotion of Molly O'Donnell to lead auditor. And a second achievement is the Andrew Scott, our IT auditor, successfully passed all parts of the Certified Information Systems audit exam. So we're proud of their achievements and look forward to their good work. All right, I will begin with your permission. I'll begin I'm with the wrong cursor here. All right, our agenda for today. I'd like to spend some time talking about the Institute of Internal Auditors Global Audit Standards, the update. As you know that we will be doing some early adoption. I'll spend a little time on that. At the Audit Committee and Board request, we'll be giving the updated presentation on the rail car replacement and infrastructure audit activities. We'll also turn it over to staff. We'll be giving you their updates on the quarterly activities for the first quarter 2024. And then one of our high-risk items and something we're focusing on is cybersecurity here in the organization, so we have an update on that as well. I'll begin with the new internal audit standards. We introduced this at our last internal audit committee meeting. The last time the standards were, I'll say, overhauled or updated was in 2017. And they went through an overhaul in 2024. These are the International Professional Practice Framework and Standards that they provide for us, these standards and oversight. These new standards are effective January 9th, 2025. And our staff is studying those standards. We've attended training, and we are, as I said before, we'll be early adopting these standards as they put out more practice guides and we learn more about them. An overview is that there's 5 domains, 15 principles, and 52 standards that I'll talk about a little bit in detail in the next couple slides. What I want to spend some time on today is there are 5 domains. Domain 3 is the governing the internal audit function, which is specific to the Board of Trustees. And for the IIA, the Board and Audit Committee, they mean the same, okay? They're defined as the same. So Domain 3. And in Domain 3, there are 3 principles, and then there are 8 standards. And I'd like to talk about each of these, if I can, quickly. The first principle is the Principle 6, authorized by the Board. The Board establishes, approves, and supports the mandate of the internal audit function. Okay, and that particular principle includes the following standards: the internal audit mandate, the internal audit charter, and the board and senior management support. I'll talk a little bit about those in the next couple slides. The second principle, or 7th principle, is positioned independently. The board establishes and protects the internal audit function's independence and qualifications. There are two standards underneath this principle. First is the organizational independence, and then the chief audit executive qualifications. And then the third principle is number 8, overseen by the board. The board oversees the internal audit function to ensure the function's effectiveness. And then underneath this particular principle, there are 4 standards: board interaction, resources, quality, and the external quality assessment. So it is, as is written in the standards, it's my responsibility to share and inform the board and the audit committee about Domain 3. Let me start with Principle 6, authorized by the board. Let's talk about the internal audit mandate. The mandate specifies the authority, role, and responsibility of the internal audit function. It includes internal audit's purpose to provide objective assurance, advice, insight, and foresight, the direct reporting relationship to the board, and full and unrestricted access to all functions, data, records, information, personnel, and property. As I move forward, many of these principles and standards are already included in the current internal audit charter. You'll see them as we revise and update our charter in accordance with the model charter that's been recently released by the Institute of Internal Audit. But this is the what's known as the internal audit mandate. Okay, the second standard within the principle authorized by the board is the internal audit charter. Basically, this is the written, this documents the internal audit mandate. So you have the mandate, the charter documents the mandate. It's approved by the board. It defines roles and responsibilities for the board and the chief audit executive. It establishes safeguards to independence and objectivity, and is subject to periodic review. Again, this is written within the current internal audit charter, and you'll see it in our revised or updated charter. All right, and then the third principle, I'm sorry, this is a timeline to implement the charter. So we wanted to spend some time with, the Institute of Internal Audit did release a model charter. Our staff is looking at that model. We're comparing our existing charter to the model. Our plan is to bring the revised charter or draft to the next audit committee, which is scheduled in August. And within that time period, we will be soliciting feedback from the board and senior management as required by the Institute. And then what we'll look for at the November audit committee meeting is a referral to the full board for the board to approve the charter in time for the January 5th, 2024 implementation.
And one of the things that Tony and Stephen and I discussed when we were prepping the slides is we're trying to look at some of the comments from that external assessment relative to these new standards. There were some questions there relative to the direction internal audit was getting from the board, sort of internal audit, inspector general, that whole area, some other items there. So as part of this work, I know we've pulled together some other information. We're sort of meeting on the side on that as well to try and pull those all together.
Okay. The next standard under the principle authorized by the board is support for the internal audit function, fulfillment of the internal audit mandate, and then formal and informal meetings, including meetings between the board and the audit function without senior management present. The second principle, organizational independence. Okay, this first standard, organizational independence, defined as the freedom from conditions that impair the internal audit function's ability to carry out its responsibilities in an unbiased manner. This can be accomplished by functional reporting to the board with administrative reporting to the chief executive officer. This is the current reporting that we have within the authority and our audit charter. So we'll have that again, you can expect to see that again in our revised charter. And then identifying and eliminating impairments to independence. The second standard under Principle 7, the Chief Audit Executive's qualifications. And these qualifications should be approved by the board. Understanding the global internal audit standards. Experience building and managing an effective internal audit function. Professional education, certifications, and other credentials. Leadership experience, industry or sector experience. And as I've shared with Mayor Kumar, I have a responsibility to think about succession planning, and the board has a responsibility to think about, how they may bring on my successor at some point. So, these are some of the tenets that you should consider. Principle 8, overseen by the board. So, reporting requirements, board interaction. Certainly the internal audit plan that you approve each year, okay? That we develop a risk-based plan and you approve. Changes affecting the mandate or charter that we talked about a little bit earlier we'll bring to you, for the draft in August. Any impairments to independence. Results of audit engagements. We share a quarterly report highlighting the information with the entire board, and of course this is that detailed report at the project level. And then the results of quality assurance and improvement program. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple slides. Resources. It's my responsibility to communicate to the board when resources are insufficient to fulfill the internal audit mandate. That could be audit staff, the need for additional or where we have outdated technology. And please be mindful that we just updated our audit management system. So we have the latest technology. And we also have a data analysis software technology that we use for scripting, that Randy and Andrew will share some of those results with. And we have access to all of the systems here at the authority. So a little bit about technology. External resources, including guest auditors, co-sourcing and outsourcing. A little bit later in the presentation, you'll hear about us, or that we'll have a need to outsource or co-source some of our medical claims audit, where we'll need the expertise of those resources. Quality. It's my responsibility to develop and implement and maintain a quality assurance and improvement program that covers all aspects of the internal audit function. That includes internal assessments, so our ongoing review of projects, working papers, staff, training, okay? And then also the external assessments. We'll talk about that in the next slide here. The external quality assessment. The Chief Audit Executive must develop a plan for an external quality assessment and discuss that plan with the board. By the way, that plan and that discussion is memorialized in the current audit charter. You'll see it again in our revised charter. The external assessment must be performed at least once every 5 years by a qualified independent assessor and assessment team. The requirement for an external quality assessment may also be met through a self-assessment with independent validation. This is the course we took in March of 2023, and we had an outside firm come in, and if you recall, they gave us a generally conforms, which is the highest rating they can provide to our internal audit department. So we will be continuing our efforts in the internal assessment, and then we will be looking forward to how we'll lay out a plan and execute that external assessment in the future. So that wraps up the Domain 3 and a summary of highlights. Again, you should expect that in August, we will be bringing back to you a draft internal audit charter. We'll have a comparison of the current charter with the new charter in accordance with the new practice models, and we look forward to that opportunity to share that with you. Any questions before I move forward? Okay. As I said earlier, the Audit Committee and the Board asked us to emphasize and focus on the rail car replacement and infrastructure activities. So we've built an audit program around that. It's a our audit plan, our audit program includes many aspects of the rail car replacement program, and it should and will, throughout its phases. Just a reminder, there's two contracts, or there's a contract and a contract option, okay, where we had 24 high-floor light rail vehicles, spare parts, tooling, and training. And then at some point later, December, I believe 2023, the board exercised the option for 6 additional high-floor light rail vehicles. And at the request of Mayor Kumar, just for some of the new members, high-floor light rail vehicles will operate on all of the lines, red, blue, green, and waterfront lines. So you see that note at the bottom. One train operates on all of the lines. Our contract compliance audit, we divide that up in accordance with the procurement phases. In the pre-award contract compliance phase, we completed a procurement audit. Did we procure the vendor in accordance with the federal regulations? And then as required by the Federal Transit Administration, we completed a pre-award Buy America review. We are now in post-award contract compliance, where we're auditing project management and deliverables, contract administration, which includes change orders, and we're reviewing project management records and invoices. This is our standard slide. You'll see more of these slides as we get into our audit activity. As we talked about, we've left the pre-award stage, the contracts in the manufacture stage at this point. This is a project management slide that I stole from our project manager, Brian Moore. He made a very good presentation to ODOT in a recent meeting. And this is where they're at in the project. They're in design review, okay? And you can see on the left, maybe it's, I guess the left, they have the rail car divided up into 5 different groups. And these 5 different groups are going through a series of different design reviews, okay? And you can see moving over to the right, that process will take place going into early September, where final design reviews and meetings will occur. And for more information, I expect that Brian and the project team will give updates to the board, but I just wanted to give you that snapshot in terms of where things are at this point, and that where we are with our audit of things at this point. You asked for us to keep track and audit change orders. Okay, to date there are 4 change orders. This is the procurement change order log. There's a segregation of duties here. There's the project office, and then there's the procurement department. On the change order log, each one of these has been presented, and the first change order was the 6 additional rail cars, okay? Then the second change order, that was spare parts, additional couplers that they had to purchase. The third change order was a change in the scheduled delivery of vehicles. And then the last change order was for smoke detectors that were not in the original contract and design. So those are the 4. Those are the amounts. And at the request of Mayor Kumar and for the new board members, I've invited Sharon Cottrell-Peffer and Lou Catalucci. They're from our procurement department, and they're going to give you a quick workflow update on the procurement and change order process so that to improve your comfort level. So I'm going to turn it over to Sharon and Lou, who are in the back.
Good morning, Mayor Kumar, members of the committee, CEO Birdsong Terry. I'm Sharon Cottrell-Peffer. I'm filling in for Melinda D'Angelo, the Director of Procurement, who can't be here today. And Luke Catalucci is with me. We are both senior members of the Procurement Department. And we're here to talk to you about the change order process. This is high level only, not going to get in the weeds unless you guys ask us to. So without further ado, Contract modifications are meant to be, they're meant to authorize additions, deletions, or revisions to the work in the original contract. That could be scope, it could have to do with the price or the schedule. They can be initiated by either GCRTA or the contractor. Typically, once a change is realized that we have something we want to change, the project manager will provide procurement with a justification and a cost estimate, a scope of work, as well as a purchase requisition to fund what they believe to be the estimated cost. Then procurement will obtain a proposal with the, and it could be for plus minus depending on what the change is. And then we negotiate along with the project manager and the vendor, as well as anybody else we feel that is pertinent to the negotiation team. We'll bring them in and we'll negotiate to find the, the happy medium for everyone. The change order committee gets involved when any change is at or above $50,000. So the change order members, the committee members consist of legal, internal audit, Office of Management Budget, Office of Business Development, grants, the project office, and procurement. And basically what we do, procurement will provide a complete package as if it was a brand new procurement with all of the normally required documentation, and we would present that to the committee and the change order committee, and then open the floor for them to ask us any questions. More or less having the committee vet the change before we ask either the CEO, GM CEO, or the board for approval. And then once we get everyone's approval, then we'll proceed. Which direction we go depends upon the dollar value of the change. As for our delegations of authority, if the contract is up to $1 million, we have $100,000 in GM change order authority. Anything beyond that goes to the board for, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. It depends upon the original value of the contract. The higher the contract, the higher the thresholds. So if the contract's between $1 million and $5 million, then the change order threshold is either 10% of the contract value or a maximum of $250,000. That would be India's GM change order authority. For anything over $5 million, we're at $500,000 for GM change order authority. And then the board can authorize changes to that, as was done with this rail car project, where it was almost $164 million, and we did a resolution in November that was approved that increased that GM change order authority to $6.5 million. So basically, we vet everything, and then there's a lot more in the weeds as far as paperwork and processes, but that's a high-level overview. And then either, like I said, depending upon the dollar value, either India will approve it or we will bring it to the board via resolution. After we get approval, be it from the GM CEO or from the board, then we issue a notice to proceed to the contractor.
Great, thank you so much. And I know we passed that resolution with that change order given the scope of this contract. And it makes sense because with the board meeting twice a month, we've got to move this project to completion, and invariably change order is going to occur. But I think it's super important to understand the process and the management members that are involved to vet that, to give the CEO guidance on that if it falls within her authority to make that change order and keep that project moving and get the cars delivered hopefully on time and on budget. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon and Lou. One more word on change orders is that the Internal Audit Department does a detailed review of the procurement files and the project management files, to prepare ourselves for the change order committee. Okay, and then we'll weigh in there. The next is a project management record as opposed to a procurement record. This is the potential change order log. So what's on the horizon? What could be a change order? And if you look at that last one, I know it's a little bit small, but it speaks to the additional rail profiles. And those profiles are just different track profiles that may result in some non-recurring engineering costs, okay, for our contractor. Those are still being evaluated. They're still being negotiated, okay? Not a change order yet, but between project management, the procurement department, and internal audit, we have our eyes on it. Okay, in addition to the rail car manufacturing contract, there is the rail car engineering consultant. That's Hatch LTK, working alongside of the project management group. So not currently under audit, all right, but a contract, and when necessary, we will engage. What did it? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Stephen. Before I moved on to the other contracts, we did want to give an update in terms of how much money was spent. So as of May 3rd, $47,204,319.24 has been paid to the rail car manufacturer. Okay, I'll skip over to the next consulting slide. With every major project, there is a safety and security consulting service contract that's in place. And this is that, the K&J Safety and Security Consulting Services, Inc. Again, not under audit, but if necessary, we will engage. These are the rail car infrastructure modifications that are known at this point. This slide is a project management slide as well as an engineering department or division slide that I used for this presentation. It just highlights the different infrastructure modifications that are required. You certainly have heard about the Cleveland connector track with the port, and then you have heard about the Brook Park Rail Shop engineering and services modification. Both of those have been brought to the board. These other projects, okay, some are out on the street for bid, others are in negotiation, but as these projects come to fruition, then we will include them in our audits, okay, and in our matrix. This is the one contract that is in place. It is with Parsons Transportations Group, and as I said before, the port connector and the Brook Park Rail Shop modifications.
Chair, question? Tony, would you mind going back to one?
Sure.
Yeah. These infrastructure projects, are these, I'm assuming these are not budgeted, or am I incorrect on that? And maybe you said some.
Well, I'll ask Mike Schipper to respond to that. These are really, his division is handling these projects.
Yeah, Mayor Weiss and members of the board, these projects are included in the total program budget. So when we talk about the total program being $393 million, there is 20-some million allotted for this grouping of projects. So they're in a various state of design and construction. The goal is to have much of the work done prior to the arrival of the first car, except for the modifications to the platforms, which will be contracted, but that modification, particularly to the Red Line project, will be a installation that happens when we're ready to go live with the project. Great. So, yeah, this grouping is part of the railcar program, and it is part of the overall program budget.
Versus the change order where it's not?
Right. Well, we have some contingency money in the program budget also, which which the change orders go toward that. Use up the contingency.
Right.
And
okay.
We will end up using up all the contingency by the time we're done.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions before I move? Okay. We are receiving a significant amount of funding from the federal government, and they have assigned a project management oversight. Okay, and you can see their the criteria, and what they're doing here is the project on time, within budget, in conformance with design and quality criteria, in compliance with all applicable federal requirements, and constructed to approved plans and specifications, delivering the identified benefits and safety efficiently and effectively. That project management oversight also took a look at our pre-award Buy America review. Okay, that report was recently released by the feds, and I'll just say it passed. We did very well with our review. And I want to mention that at the leadership of Ms. Birdsong Terry, the management group is meeting with the Federal Transit Administration Region 5 on a quarterly basis. We go there one quarter, they come here the next quarter. And Ms. Terry, if you'd like to say anything about that.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate that. That has, I think, cut down probably at least 50 emails already, being able to go in person. We had a pretty robust agenda, maybe about a month and a half ago now, and their next visit to us will be post the APTA conference sometime in the end of June, I believe, if not July. I've got to get the date. But they will be here. The room usually consists of 4 or 5 folks from our team, including finance and engineering, planning, and grants management, depending on what we're talking about. And then on their side of the room is their Region 5 administrator, which is Kelly Brookins, out of the Chicago office, along with some project managers and key planners for the grant process on their side. And we meet and talk through everything. We've also consulted with IA before we went to see if there was anything outstanding, so it was good. We were able to shore up some questions and concerns that we had on both sides of the table as far as application of grants and how to kind of consolidate and kind of breeze through the money to make sure that not a cent is left on the table. And we will continue in that process of the back and forth that Tony's talking about, and include audit when necessary, especially if we have them coming to us. One thing I did want to mention is that I think they had not seen our business in quite a while in person, so like the rail yard and that kind of thing. So I'm sure we'll be working in some tours for them, and that would be probably a good thing for the board to be aware of as well, as we start to re-engage you guys, especially with the newer members, to see what our products and services are. So it's been pretty good. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Back to our Buy America, required Buy America audits. So again, we did complete that pre-award and prior to the award, the contract award to Siemens Mobility, and the feds require us to do intermediate audits on Buy America. When the rail cars start to come on site, we'll have to do a post-delivery Buy America review, all right? And then these cars are going to be coming on site for a number of years after, so domestic content monitoring, all right? The cars must be built in the United States. The suppliers must be at least 70% U.S. domestic, all right? And they must be built to specifications. So we will be engaged in those audits, throughout the different phases. Ms. Birdsong Terry?
You're right, Terry, you got it. It's easier. Quick question. Can you just expound for a moment on the 70% Buy America? Because I know we've got some new board members here, and I know I've had some questions from folks over the years about what our requirements might look like, especially because a lot of parts come from China and other areas, especially when we get into discussions about things like electrified vehicles and different fuel sources. Usually a question is, what does that reliance on the Buy America look like?
For sure. First, let me talk about Buy America as it relates to construction projects if we're using federal funds. That's 100% domestic content, 100% domestic supplier. When we talk about rolling stock is rail cars, buses, paratransit vehicles. We're buying a locomotive, a rail car mover, a support vehicle for the rail cars. That's rolling stock. When the feds came out with their regulations, 60% was required Okay, 60% domestic content, and then 60% of the parts must come from an American supplier. Okay, those regulations escalated, so now it went from 60 to 65, and I believe in October of 2017 or 18, with the FAST Act it was called, it's now 70%. So 70% of the parts and must come from a domestic supplier.
Just a question, understand the intent of that. Is there a case where that just might not be possible? Have we run into that? And are there, if that's not able because it's just simply not produced, are there ways to navigate that?
Yes, there are. You can apply for a waiver with the Federal Transit Administration, where basically they're advertising, the feds will help you advertise, throughout the country, just to kind of double check, are there any domestic suppliers? There is a significant waiting period for that. I've heard it could take up to 6 months, okay, or more. And then if the feds do grant you that waiver, then, you can then apply it towards your 70% domestic content. I can assure you, though, in the case of Siemens, Molly and Stephen went to Sacramento, and they were well beyond the 70% they're capable of. So we are confident that there is enough domestic suppliers in place to support this procurement.
So, one other question. 70%, just to make sure I understand the math, the 70% is content of the rail cars.
It's 70% of the rail cars, and then if we use federal funds for the infrastructure, okay, then 100% is the rule.
So when we're,
So steel for the tracks, the ballast has to come from, the stone between the ties themselves, all from American suppliers.
the first part, for the products in the rail cars,
Yes.
if a company does 50% of their business overseas and 50% domestically, does that count against you in that calculation?
There are some rules in place where if the supplier has some of their business out of the country, and those rules will address what you're saying, it really matters where the final assembly of the component occurs. So if they're getting a particular ingredient or a particular subcomponent, and it's assembled in the United States, it can count towards the 70%.
Okay.
But it's spelled out in the regulations. And in fact, when Stephen and Molly went to Sacramento, they encountered that. And Siemens had to make a substitute and did. So we're well aware of those regulations. As I said before, when the feds did their oversight of our Buy America audit, they identified where we identified that. And that was part of the report. So we have to stay sharp.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, for your information, a company out of Chicago, LS Gallegos, is the Fed's choice to be the project management oversight. They have monthly check-in meetings with project management, with procurement, the engineering group. We're invited, we attend them all. So they have a formal agenda. So they are staying in touch with what's happening with this project, with all those bullet points that I shared a little bit earlier. Okay, and then the last bullet here is, there's no hidden agenda here. The LS Gallegos is using a Federal Transit Administration management oversight procedure, okay? So we have the answers to the test before the test occurs. With that, I'll ask if there's any other questions before I turn it over to the staff and go over our standard quarterly activities. Seeing, hearing none, let me introduce our audit manager, Stephen Zimmerman.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, General Manager and CEO Anita Birdsong-Terry. My name is Stephen Zimmerman, and I'm the Audit Manager in the Internal Audit Department. And we are pleased today to present to you the results of our first quarter activities. At an upcoming board meeting, Tony will share with you the written quarterly report. Today's presentation will be a little more in-depth and detail, but this slide shows what the table of contents of that written report looks like and will mostly mirror our presentation today. I also want to call your attention to some boxes on the bottoms of some slides as we proceed through the presentation that will reference the internal audit, global audit standards that a particular slide might be referencing. In this case, this is part of a standard for communicating results, where we communicate to the board and senior management, in our case on a quarterly basis. I also want to remind the board that as part of the first quarter audit activities was our audit planning for the year, which did take up a portion of our time. The rest we'll share with you in these upcoming slides. This is an example template that will kind of show you what the different sections of the next few completed projects and projects in progress slides will look like. So we'll share with you what the title of the audit is, what the objective of the audit, or the purpose. And then when we say scope, what we mean for these slides is what was the audit program, or what was the testing fieldwork that we planned to complete or did complete for a particular engagement. When we have audit results, when a project is complete, they can range from satisfactory to marginally satisfactory to marginally unsatisfactory to unsatisfactory. And then we'll also sometimes have issues that we want to share with the board, where we call issues for board consideration. Those are areas of high risk that the board should consider for oversight and governance. It does not mean that there's any action required to take with the board. As a reminder, we do share all of our results with management, where we hold exit conferences, receive feedback, management response, and action plans to address our recommendations, and which we follow up in our audit management system teammate. So for the first completed project for the quarter, we completed an audit of paratransit contracted services. So as a reminder, 50% of our operations of paratransit services is provided by third-party contractors across 3 different contractors. Our objective was to provide assurance of contract compliance for those contracted paratransit services. The scope was the current contract period, which included vehicle maintenance, operator payroll, fare collection, vehicle cameras, and the drug and alcohol program compliance. The results of that audit were unsatisfactory, with findings and recommendations for management, although I will mention that the unsatisfactory rating is for the contractor performance, not necessarily the GCRTA contract management performance. And we actually received some areas that we were requested to look at from contractor management for compliance. The reason that this was a result with an unsatisfactory rating, but we do not have issues for board consideration, is again, those are all contract items. There was no very large risk item in particular, and all of those issues have been rectified with contract management and the contractor at this time. Sure.
Can you just clarify the timelines that you look back to when you're reviewing these cases?
Yeah, so this was, for this particular audit, our scope was the current contract period, which had just started in 2023, and we had done the audit mostly in the summer and fall of 2023, with some validation occurring in the winter, and then final reporting was in January, February of 2024. So we were looking at the current contract period, which was, so when we did vehicle maintenance, for example, we went out to the garages to observe how they maintain their vehicles according to contract requirements, because there's requirements outlined. Same for operator payroll. What were their operators making since the start of the new contract period, because that was a requirement of the contract. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but I have a follow-up. So how often would you look at paratransit contracted services? So
Sure.
like, is there anything that would tell you that this was an issue before you started the review in 2023? And like, just help me understand this broader context too.
Absolutely. So we include paratransit contracted services in our risk universe. So every year when we're developing our annual audit plan, we do a risk assessment to identify what are the highest risk areas in the company, which include things such as what are the key management objectives, key compliance items. In this case, paratransit riders are very vulnerable. Third-party contracts are always high risk. So it's a high-risk item in our universe. So this is not the first time we've audited paratransit contracted services. We've done audits over the years. And in this case, because we had an unsatisfactory result, we would likely cycle it again in the near future to audit more soon than we would otherwise have chosen. So I'd say that we probably have audited this at least 3 times in my tenure, and that's going back to 2017.
If I could add, when we complete any and all of our audit projects. We debrief, and then we have a post-audit risk rating assessment. And that's where we determine, is this still remains a high-risk contractor, process, workflow, policy compliance area, whatever we're auditing. And then there's where we'll develop the frequency. Should we do it again at the end of the year, within a year, within a 3-year cycle? So, and then we, as Stephen said, on an annual basis, semi-annual basis, we're constantly looking at risk and the frequency and when we should be doing audits.
And I just want to add, too, as part of our audit recommendation follow-up process, when we issue a recommendation, so in this case, we issue some recommendations for some corrections from the contractor. We then seek evidence that those recommendations were implemented. So we've validated at this point that all of our recommendations were fully implemented by the 3 contractors, which might also give you some comfort in the choice of when do we cycle it again. Well, we can't cycle it right away because they have to implement it. We've validated it, and they have some time again to do their normal operations to see if they slip back into old habits.
Thank you. That was very helpful context. I know that we hear often from paratransit users about different aspects of their service. So this question kind of bridges your work as well as maybe some other departmental functions of the agency. But do we have any plans to sort of communicate out to riders or the general public, like these are the steps that we've taken to improve the experience on the buses? I think there's an opportunity for, like we heard you, and this is what we've done to improve here, and just wonder if we've thought about that.
Adding, I don't think a lot of people know that 50% of the paratransit is through a third-party application or a third-party period. So I think to your point, that makes a lot of sense that there would be some communication. And I too am wondering what that communication kind of looks like when there is unsatisfactory performance on a broader external communication space. Only because we do get so many comments about paratransit. And again, I'm thinking about how didn't we just get vehicles for paratransit, right? So that's separate from the third parties, correct? They use their own vehicles. So if we're having issues with people on paratransit with vehicles that aren't our vehicles, but their vehicles, how are we communicating around addressing those issues?
So I think those are good questions, and definitely Natoya and Doc, if you have comments and thoughts as well, welcome to it. I think that we have to be able to be very careful with the way that we communicate because we own the product, we own the service, and regardless of who the provider is, it's still RTA. And so that's where I think it's a very delicate balance of making sure that we kind of stay on top of the providers to follow the procedures that we have and the guidelines that we have. At the end of the day, the person that hops on the service just knows RTA. And so what I don't want to do is have an us versus them, because then it becomes a point finger inherently to say, hey, they're not doing this, but we look good. And as you mentioned, in reality, it's really a 50-50 split at this point, right, between the 3 providers and us. So we can definitely look at, though I will say, the website we're looking at different options to be able to think about how customers are going to be able to make a trip, what their customer service levels look like. There are different platforms that we're looking at now. I know Nick Davidson and the IT team on the Mike Lively side, I believe, are going through the process of, especially Nick, though, looking through the different platforms and seeing how we can upgrade the website that we have so that customers have an easier time of kind of planning their trip and their journey. That might be a good opportunity to see what kind of media platforms are also available to say, hey, this is what we've done to make your journey a little better, right? But I think that what we need to make sure we do is we express to people that we own the service. Because quite honestly, I don't want to let up on that internally, because the minute that we say it's provider ride or it's senior transportation services, we have the ability to kind of let go of the gas a little bit and then say, well, we did this, but they did that. You know what I mean? But I do think that there's opportunities for us to be able to let the customers know about what we have done holistically to make their ride better. But the providers have to understand that their brand is ours. So they don't have the slack to be able to underperform and still keep their contract. That's another thing too. So yeah, we can definitely take a look at that. So let's make a note from the operations and the marketing team to be able to think about ways that we can dedicate that. And I'm not sure on our current page in the paratransit if maybe there's a section we can sort of amp up in that regard. That might be a good opportunity too for the committee work for paratransit representation, whether it's CAC or others, to be able to think about ways that we communicate that back out.
If I could add, this is Flonse Caver, the Chief Operating Officer, who's responsible for the paratransit service. If I could just sort of add where we've come from and where we are now. And so as we've had in the past customers with complaints, and rightfully so, complaints about the paratransit service. In the contract immediately preceding the one that Steve and his team has audited, we put in some measures to make sure that the service was better. Those were the average age of the fleet, and so the old contract did have older vehicles in it and things of that nature. We've added uniform requirements, we've added other customer service components that have been received well by the community. I'd like to share with the board that we have had a reduction in the us versus them narrative. Doesn't mean it's not there or someone can't exactly see the differences, but we have had a reduction. But I do want to communicate that we conduct quarterly annual surveys of the paratransit customers, and while you see a term unsatisfactory here, that is not the description that they have of the service. In fact, they have one of, through TransPro's numbers, one of the highest rated paratransit services for Net Promoter Score and overall customer satisfaction with the service. And so surely the service isn't perfect because we deal in a day where daily you have issues, but the service is a long way from the experiences that we may have heard that created the emotive necessary. We did make changes under the leadership of Lucas and Nick, and those changes are taking place. I'd like to also say that, and if I can, Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong, but that unsatisfactory there isn't service, right? So it sounds like satisfaction is usually connected to service. It is unsatisfactory in that they found some areas for corrective action or recommendations for us to fix. And we have fixed those items. The majority of those were not customer facing. So there are technical things in the background that were expectations. And so while you see unsatisfactory there, being the leader of the unit, I don't take that to mean that the service is bad. It meant that there were areas for us to work on, correct, or find other solutions to address within the contract management, largely within the contract management portion. So Stephen, if my understanding is different, you can correct me, but I think that best describes our experiences with you guys.
Stephen, this is Tony, Dr. Caver. Let me make another comment here. As part of this audit, we acted as secret shoppers. We obtained a paratransit ID from our paratransit district, and then we scheduled rides during non-peak services so we wouldn't interrupt service. We sampled each of the contractors. We looked for things such as customer service, cleanliness, the customer-facing pieces that Flonse just mentioned, and that's not the unsatisfactory that's in this report. We had very good experience riding these vehicles, okay? The unsatisfactory speaks to the back office contract compliance at their individual businesses. And basically, we are comparing them to us in terms of the high level of service that we expect of our operators in our paratransit district. We expect the same from our contractors.
Thank you. I will be as fast as possible. This is just, I think, a really good opportunity for us to, not to necessarily pat ourselves on the back through a finding, but to be able to say that we have a higher expectation of a lot of our vendors, right? So I'm talking about universally, that I think we find, whether it's a vendor providing a service or a vendor that has a contract with us that's providing something else that is inadvertently branded as RTA, right?
Yeah.
That I think the more and more we elevate our own brand, and the more and more that we have the back office competency that Tony's talking about and the operational efficiency that Doc is talking about, we inherently require everyone else to have the same standard. And when we find that they don't have that, then it comes back on us, which is okay. But I think at that point, it's a good educational experience for us to become the teacher, but also have to hold them to the same standard in order to continue to do business. And that's where we're starting to see that shift in folks, quite frankly, that did business as usual because they may have gotten away with it in years past in different situations, right? Or perhaps it's a workforce issue, they can't hire, perhaps it's a turnover situation, and now their standards are obviously lower than those that we hold at RTA. So it's a kind of balancing act that I think we have to make sure that they are actually performing at the level that we require of ourselves.
Really good point. It's really good.
Thanks so much for all those details. I think as we talked through it, this is a story about good governance and stewardship of resources, about responsiveness, about customer-facing experience that's really good. And I would just love for more people to know about that. I think there's an opportunity.
All right, thank you, everyone. Our next project, I'll turn over to Laura Crawshaw, who will talk about customer communications for service interruptions.
Good morning, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the committee, GM, CEO Birdsong Terry. I'm Laura Crawshaw, I'm a staff auditor. I'll be presenting my completed project from the quarter. We completed an audit of the customer communications process for service interruptions. Our objective was to evaluate our processes for responding to and communicating planned and unplanned service interruptions to customers. We looked at 2 case studies to document RTA customer communications. Our results were marginally satisfactory with findings and recommendations for management, and we have a couple issues for board consideration that I will detail in the next slides. So we have some general recommendations for improvements to customer communications, including internal SOP enhancements, transit app messaging, social media strategies, subscription-based communication, and enhanced ADA compliance.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Help me, SOP.
Standard operating procedure. So our bigger recommendation that we'd like to talk about is to develop a customer experience plan and assign customer experience oversight. Management has implemented several initiatives under the Traction Customer Experience Success outcome, like mobile payment, cleaning programs, the vinyl seats on the rail cars, customer surveys. So we recommend to develop an authority-wide customer experience strategic plan to formalize these and future actions, and also to centralize and report progress to the public. This plan can be utilized to identify gaps and further enhance the rider's experience. Additionally, consider hiring a dedicated customer experience officer to address and coordinate customer experience initiatives, and this person could have a key role in this process of customer communications for service interruptions.
And it should be noted that the customer experience officer and sometimes a support staff is a best practice. It's growing within the industry, and that is shared with Ms. Terry, and I think she wants to say a few words.
I do. You're reading my mind, Tony. Just wanted to give a quick update. And George, I'm not sure if for HR you had a couple quick words, but I actually do have, I want to say 2 or 3 SOPs, standard operating procedures, on my desk right now that have to do with service interruptions. So I'll be signing off on those by Friday. Just wanted to make sure I reviewed all of them pretty thoroughly. They're a little lengthy. And they've been sitting on there for a couple of weeks, so I wanted to make sure you knew that as well from the management side. And then also on my desk, I have a final draft of the, George, help me out with the name. Go ahead.
Senior Director of Customer Experience and Performance Management.
Thank you very much. That job, JDQ, or job description, is on my desk as well. I believe that that one should be posted pretty soon so that we can get the ball rolling. And as Tony mentioned, the idea is for that to be a small department. So that would be the initial hire, to be able to start to review this kind of stuff, but I want to make sure that that individual has an opportunity to weigh in on the folks that would work for them. And again, it's not going to be a team of 10 or 20, right? We're talking small, maybe 3 or so, but we want to make sure that that person is brought on first to be able to look at this, and that's also important as we go through the SOPs, that all of that is done comprehensively. George, did I miss anything?
No, you've
We've
got
changed.
this, Terry.
Thank you. We've changed the title quite a few times. I think we're done with that. Thank you.
And then I'll hand it over to Staff Auditor Darren Garlock.
Thank you, Laura. All right, so for the travel and expense reimbursement, internal audit reviews 100% of all travel reimbursement requests for compliance with policies and procedures. Any exceptions to the procedure are returned for correction before being submitted for final approval, and the results are satisfactory with findings and recommendations for management, and there are no issues for board consideration. And now I'll transition to projects that are currently in progress. This is the traction performance measurement audit at the request of GM CEO Birdsong Terry. Internal audit has been evaluating the survey inputs for traction. Our objective was to validate that survey design and methodology are reliable and that the results are accurately captured and reported. Our scope included the customer experience, community value, and workplace experience surveys from 2022. Now in the reporting phase, we will be scheduling an exit conference with management. The Tower City Common Area Maintenance Agreement. The Common Area Maintenance Agreement is an agreement between GCRTA and Bedrock Real Estate, which allows our customers to use the common areas of Tower City to access the Rapid Station and the Gateway Walkway. The objective was to identify the requirements of the agreement and to validate compliance with those terms. The scope included a payment history review, invoice accuracy, utility billing, and reimbursable expenses. We're now in the reporting phase, and management is currently negotiating payment terms for 2024. The Waterfront Line Bridge rehabilitation. Internal audit's objective is to provide assurance of engineering project management controls. The scope is a 100% milestone review to evaluate contract compliance, and we are currently in the reporting phase. And this is the viaduct rehabilitation. This is another construction audit that seeks to provide assurance of engineering project management controls, and we are currently in the testing phase. Service quality bus field supervision. Our objective is to evaluate the processes and procedures for successful field supervision of buses that are in revenue service. Our scope includes 2023 supervisor logs, the coverage that the field supervisors have, service assessment remarks, or SARs, and then when those SARs are followed up at the district. And we are currently in the testing phase. Supply chain contract management. Our objective is to document strategies used to manage 5 centralized contracts, assessing the risks and evaluating the effectiveness of the controls that are currently in place. We're currently in the planning phase, and we will decide the scope once the risk assessment has been completed. And now I'd like to toss it back to Laura, I believe, who is going to discuss her projects in progress.
So my first project in progress is an audit of electronic funds transfer. Our objective is to document the controls over EFT and provide assurance on the efficacy of those controls. Our scope is the electronic funds transfer process for grant and non-grant funded activities, and this project is in the reporting phase. The next project is a construction audit of the Hayden Roof Replacement Project. Our objective is to provide assurance of engineering project management controls for the project. and the scope is controls testing. We're in testing and field work for this project. This project is almost a $6 million replacement project, and it's about 75% complete. Next is an audit of accident incident training and discipline outcomes. Our objective is to evaluate processes and controls in place to ensure the efficacy, consistency, and quality of training and discipline outcomes that result from accident incident review. The scope is operator retrains, discipline, accident review committee training, and a grievance risk analysis, and we're in the testing fieldwork phase. My last project in progress is an audit of the maintenance management system upgrade. Our objective is to provide assurance over the upgrade, validating that end user system requirements are implemented, interfaces are operational, reporting is reliable, and identity and access management is appropriately configured. We're in the risk assessment phase, and we'll determine the scope upon completion of that phase. And I'll hand it over to Molly.
Before you hand it over, could you give a brief overview of what the maintenance management system upgrade is?
Yeah, so we have a maintenance management system to manage our assets. So that'll be rolling stock, facilities, and that's how we order inventory, parts to maintain the assets, and schedule maintenance on the assets. So we recently upgraded from an older system to a newer system, and that's what we're looking at.
Good morning, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, and General Manager CEO Birdsong Terry. The first project in progress I have to discuss is our audit of transit police overtime and compensatory time. Our objective was to provide assurance on the completeness, cutoff, and accuracy of overtime and compensatory time for the transit police, and to evaluate management controls for authorizing, recording, processing, and paying that overtime and compensatory time. Our scope was overtime and compensatory time earned by transit police officers in the time period May 2021 through May 2023. This project is currently in reporting. We recently held an exit conference with management, and we will issue a final report in this quarter. The next project in progress I have is our audit of the City of Shaker Heights maintenance expenses. So GCRT and Shaker Heights have an interagency agreement for landscaping services along the light rail right-of-way. So our objective for this audit was to reconcile the costs of Shaker Heights right-of-way maintenance expenses against the actual amount paid by RTA, and to evaluate compliance with the terms and conditions of the interagency agreement. Our scope was the current interagency agreement period, 2021 through 2023, and we are entering reporting for this audit. Next, our Customer Service Center Tower City audit. Our objective was to perform a 100% count of all cash and fare cards within the Customer Service Center at Tower City, and to perform a data analysis of fare card sales to calculate the monthly consignment turnover before and after the pandemic at the Customer Service Center. Our scope was a cash and fare card count on January 23rd. This count was very successful. The Customer Service Center balanced within 50 cents, which is incredible. And then we also completed a fare card sales data analysis, looking at data from 2018 and 2019 and 2022 and 2023. This project is currently in the reporting phase. We recently held an exit conference with management, and we will issue a final report. Next, the Shelter Community Investment Program project. We hosted a winter intern from Miami University, Rachel. So this was a project that she largely worked on. Our objective was to evaluate community partner compliance with program requirements and to provide assurance over the payments received from the community partners that support the program. Our scope was license agreements, reconciliation of invoices sent to community partners, and looking at the inventory that we hold of enhanced shelters at Central Bus Maintenance Facility. This project is entering the reporting phase. Fiber optic, this is another construction audit. Our objective is to provide assurance of engineering project management controls. Our scope is controls testing to evaluate those project management controls, and we are wrapping up testing and field work for this project. I'll turn it over to Andrew to discuss his projects in progress.
Good morning, Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, GMCAO Birdsong Terry. First up, we have an audit of accrued time reconciliation. The objective of this audit originally started last year, has had a change in scope from being a reconciliation of time to the documentation of the processes involved in the accrued time balances, and to develop a process for regular auditing of the accrued time. The scope of this audit is to include all employee time accruals by pay group and to have a secondary engagement to follow up for the reconciliation of the hours. This is currently in the planning and risk assessment phase and will shortly begin field work. Next, we have an audit of the identity and access management. The objective of this is to take a look at the critical authority systems and evaluate the controls in place for accessing them. The scope involves governance, identity management, authentication, authorization, access control, and monitoring. The current engagement is our first one, and that is with the authority's bid dispatch system. As Laura mentioned earlier, for the asset management system, we'll be incorporating this into her audit as well and moving into implementing it into many further audits. And next up is Randy.
Good morning, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, and India, and General Manager and CEO, India Birdsong Terry. The objective of the fuel expense is the evaluation of contract compliance and to obtain background information, including expenditures, trends, documentation of the workflow processes, invoice payments, and access control. And the scope is all of the fuel that GCRTA uses to include diesel, unleaded gasoline, propane, compressed natural gas, and propulsion power, which is electricity. And we're currently in the planning and risk assessment stage. Now, this particular audit, since I'm normally do the continuous audit, this is like my first one that's like a non-continuous audit. And I'm working with Stephen on it. And because I look at everything with a continuous audit mindset, I am going to, as I go through it, try to identify areas of this that can, be done as a continuous audit. And I will talk a little bit more once I get into continuous audit later on. But for now, that's all I have. So I'll turn it over to, I believe, Stephen is up next.
Thank you, Randy. We're in the home stretch now on the projects in progress. We're wrapping up an audit of the heavy rail motor overhaul. Our objective was to evaluate the, at the time, evolving heavy rail smoky motor issue. At this time, the smoky motor issue has been resolved because 100% of all the heavy rail traction motors have been completely refurbished back to OEM specifications, received by the RTA in service. Since our last quarterly, because all those motors were received and reviewed, we were able to do our final post-delivery testing. So we're now in the reporting stage, and we'll complete the report in time for the next quarterly audit committee. And then we're also continuing to work on the post-delivery Buy America review of paratransit coaches. So per the federal grant application requirements, the GCRTA must conduct both pre-award and post-delivery audits for rolling stock, as we talked about with the rail car. In this case, it also applies to paratransit coaches. The coaches have been subject to, supply chain challenges, so it's now spreading over 2 quarters. But as soon as the coaches arrive, we coordinate with the fleet management department to get out there and complete the work as soon as possible. So we continue to do the testing for this phase. At this time, I wanted to pause before we continue on with our presentation to solicit some feedback from the board. For many quarterly committees now, we've presented our projects in progress in this format. And what we wanted to ask was, does the board like to see these projects in this format again and again in a detailed format? Or would you prefer us to put together something more summarized for the different projects. And so what the potential vision would be is that the most critical and, I guess, information valuable stage of an audit is once the risk assessment has completed and we've defined what the exact scope of work is going to be. So the idea would be is that when we start planning a project, we might just share with you what the title of the project is in a table. These are our projects that are in planning. When a project becomes in the fieldwork phase, we would share it in the more detailed format. We go through our objective, our scope, to show you exactly what we do. But then it would then graduate again to a table as it goes through fieldwork and into reporting until we finally get to completed projects where we'll share with you what the results were. So the question is, do you like the format that we've been working in, or would you prefer something more summarized?
I've talked with them already.
Well, I want to say I appreciate this format. I mean, there's some projects that I'm aware of and have been aware of only because I've been here since 2022, but then there's some projects that I am just now learning about, and I have to tell you this has been a really excellent educational opportunity as someone who is not in your work every single day, but having to govern and make decisions about it. Or at least communicate to the general public about it. So I just want to say I appreciate the format. I appreciate the intentionality around that, and I thank you for it.
I'll second that. This is very helpful in terms of understanding what's going on and also the work that you're doing. I do think that I think what you're saying, Stephen, is that we're talking about some of, like, you're sort of presenting similar slides in different stages
Correct.
across different quarters.
Correct.
And without removing any of the detail, kind of focusing in on certain projects at certain stages of the audit, which also makes sense to me. So in terms of like more process overview, having more intensive time on certain projects at certain stages of the audit. So as long as that means not that we're summarizing everything all the time, but kind of understanding and moving through things as they move through the process with more detailed dives at certain points, that makes sense to me.
Okay, so potentially have more intentional presentations as they go through the different phases. But if an audit project is taking many quarters, maybe because the fieldwork is very complex or there's some detailed considerations in the reporting phase or negotiations with management, it might make sense to provide some summary when appropriate.
I just have a question before I answer. So everything that was just in the planning and risk assessment stage, does that always advance, or is it possible that a project might, like, you might deem it very low risk and there's no reason to proceed? Does that ever happen?
Well, I'll say that in the time that I've worked in the department, and I've been here since 2017, we have never just dropped a project because it's very low risk. Usually, I mean, the objective of our annual audit planning is to try to identify the highest risk areas. So sometimes we might adjust the scope, or we might target or pivot in a particular direction. That being said, if we did do an audit where we did the risk assessment and it seemed like everything was well controlled and well documented, and we did some shorter or more condensed field work, we'd still do that short testing period so we could provide assurance. So we don't test it, we can't provide assurance. So if we just do the risk assessment, it would just be, here's the risks and here's the controls in place, but with no opinion on whether they're working effectively or not. So we do intend to carry them forward. So the concern is, what happens if a project falls off? That's not our intent. We'll carry them all through, at least all the way through to reporting.
Ms. Pachetti, just so you know, our professional standards require that if there's a change to our internal audit plan, that we must communicate that to the board.
Thank you. And this was my first audit committee, so thank you. I am learning a lot, and I'm sorry about all the questions. I'll just offer that I think I have a slight bias for, to hear about the things that are kind of going on in the testing and field work, and then focus most of the conversation on what we had reviewed previously, which is the completed audits. So to the extent that is helpful, I don't know. But I also, I did have one comment on the slides for context. I do think it's helpful when you're sharing the findings from completed projects that we understand context. So if this was ever seen before, or if it was unsatisfactory before or satisfactory before, just like understanding a little bit of, has this been reviewed even prior to the scope or timeline? I think that's helpful information.
Okay, we'll look at ways that we can expand the amount of information we share for completed projects, because I think also, we'd love to talk about them all day, actually. We're very proud of our work, so we're trying to find the right balance of how much time you guys want to listen to, hear about our completed projects, and what's the right information level. So we'll look at providing some additional context, history, to enhance those completed projects.
And I'm sorry, I defer to my colleagues because I don't have a lot of experience with this committee. I was just offering just that little, it can be very brief, but just to understand where, if projects have been reviewed before, where they landed.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll just add that I'll be a little bit of the contrarian this morning, maybe. And maybe it is because I've done this for a longer period of time in life prior to being on the RTA board. But I guess I wouldn't mind thinking about or exploring a report where we kind of highlight the things that we've identified as either results coming in unsatisfactory or marginally unsatisfactory, or projects that were not going to be completed or are looking like they're not going to be completed by the end of the year. Why, and some background on sort of the anomalies as opposed to the ones where it's relatively straightforward and it's going along without, in the normal course. So I'd just say it'd be worth exploring the, highlighting the ones where you all think you probably should focus on this one a little bit more for these reasons. So I would be fine with that.
A final thought, once our report is released, then we can provide, the full report for anyone who requests that.
My 2 cents on this would be, absent an audit of these interactions, my suspicion is that most of our comments and questions have to do with completed audits. And so some of these maybe that are ongoing, maybe a summary to remind us that that's happening. But I, for one, at least, won't have much to say about the vast majority of things that are in process. So perhaps summarizing those and then saving some of the discussion or opportunities for discussion for things that are either if something happens along the way or if it's finished up and that there's some relevant material for us. There might be something to be said for things that are about to start, but I think the things that are underway, I mean, I trust you guys, and I trust that the work is happening, and we could probably buy some of your time back during these for some of the ongoing operations.
I've got a lot of interesting ideas based on the feedback that you've all provided, so we'll demo something to the next quarterly committee. So
Yeah,
thank
we'll
you.
have a chance for you and I and Tony to sit down and talk, and I think that's great guidance, so thank you.
All right, I'll now kick it over back to the IT team, who will talk about additional MAS IT projects as well as continuous auditing.
So in addition to the projects that I already mentioned before, we have various staff members that sit on different project teams. And so the projects listed up on the screen now are in various stages of planning, risk assessment, general monitoring, and potentially testing. So we have our consolidated train dispatch system, our transit master system, the EasyFare mobile ticketing system, a new applicant tracking system for HR, learning management system for HR, the data center co-location, moving our on-premise servers and hardware to off-site, a point of sale system for the customer service center, as well as general infrastructure updates. This is turn it back over to Randy.
Because we have a lot of new board members here, I'm going to go in a little more detail than I normally have in the past. So hopefully I can answer everyone's questions. Continuous audit is a method for utilizing a series of scripts to perform auditing activities on a more frequent basis to identify risks and exceptions for investigation by appropriate staff and management. A traditional audit, normally what happens is they take a subset of data that tries to represent the whole population. And continuous audit's a little bit different because it analyzes 100% of every transaction across internal and external databases, and it repeats that process of whether it's month after month or year after year. And hopefully for RTA, we can eventually get to doing it even more frequently than that. But the first step is we establish, our priority areas that we're going to focus on for continuous audit, and I'll talk some more about that later. And then we identify the audit rules, and I would write scripts to try to incorporate those audit rules, and then determine the process frequency. Now, as we've done these continuous audits, it's gotten more efficient. A lot of the manual work that was involved with it, the scripts got better and took out a lot of that manual work. So because of that, a lot of the audits that we would do on a quarterly basis, we now do them on a monthly basis, and hopefully at some point we can get even faster than that. Step 4 is configure parameters and execute them. And some of those parameters, I'm just going to give you a couple examples. Like for payroll, we might have a parameter for excessive overtime. For purchasing card payment, it could be amounts, purchases over a certain amount. And we write scripts to try to capture those, and those don't necessarily mean anything's wrong. Those are just things we want to take an extra look at. And step 5 is manage results and follow-up. After I run the script, it outputs some type of result, and we don't automatically jump into step 6, which is reporting it. We give it a once-over ourselves just to make sure it looks okay. I'm not perfect. I might fat finger a date or something, and the data's wrong, and we try to capture that. But if we do see something that's wrong, we don't jump into step 6, and report it right away. We immediately go to management and then have them look at it and get the documentation or some type of explanation. And a good example of that is with revenue. If anything is over 2% variance, that's like the threshold for that. We contact them right away, they provide documentation, and then we go into step 6, where we report the results. And we report them in our audit management software, and it has a lot of features in there for tracking and reminders to make sure things don't fall through the cracks. And then for step 7, the process of going through 5 and 6, looking at the data, something else might jump out that, hey, this is another risk that we didn't think about. So then at step 7, I might go in and modify the script to include additional risks that we didn't think about or came about because of that. And then it gets caught the next time. Let me go to the next slide. So now I'm going to go into some of the continuous audits that we do. And the first one is paratransit customer database. The objective is to reconcile paratransit customer database against the State of Ohio deceased report. And certain tests that we do, that I actually write scripts to do, some of them are like deceased writers, duplicate names, data last ride greater than 3 years, and based on these results, some of those writers may have, the account may be deactivated. And the scope of this is develop the scripts that actually do some of the tests I just spoke about. And I know I talked about how continuous audit analyzes 100% of the records. I just want to give you an idea. what that entails. For paratransit, it utilizes 3 different databases, 460,000 records a year, and 448,000 of those records come from the deceased Ohioans database, and it goes back to 2019. And it for paratransit, it hits that every single year because we run this one once a year. And some of the results of this was from 2023, we removed 275 deceased Ohioans, not removed, but deactivated them from the paratransit database, and that's one of the ways it helps decrease risks. Go to the next one. Purchasing card. The objective of this is to provide a means for streamlining payment processes, allowing cardholders to procure goods and services in a timely manner. And just to give you an idea of some of the tests we script for is no documentation, transactions over 10,000, and split transactions. And what a split transaction is if you purchase something over a certain amount, you're supposed to provide documentation. Somebody might get the idea, I don't want to do this documentation, so I'm going to do it a little bit lower. I'm going to spread my purchases out over, maybe that day or over a couple of days. And we script to actually try to capture that. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong. It's just it flags it for someone else to look at it. And the scope of this is just to develop scripts to do these tests to make sure everyone's in compliance with GCRTA policy. And again, this goes through 6 databases and about 2,100 records every month. And the script was the result, executed and given to management. Okay, go to the next one. Revenue collection. The objective is to evaluate and provide assurance customer fares are collected from the fare collection system and are reconciled, posted to accounting records, and deposited to the bank. And just to give you an idea, some of the tests that we script for, it's GFI, what was collected with GFI versus what Brinks said was collected, what Brinks collected versus what we show deposited to the bank, ACS versus Oracle, and there's a whole lot of other ones, but I'm not going to get into detail. And to give you an idea of the amount of data that it goes through, it's 8 databases. In-house, it's ACS, GFI, and Oracle. External databases are like Brinks and KeyBank, and that's 97,000 records a month. And this was executed monthly, and we share it with management. Payroll. I lost my spot here. Okay, payroll is the objective is to evaluate payroll data from the authority's ERP system. And some of the scripts that we run for payroll are, say, suspicious deductions, excessive overtime, and there are some others, but I'm not going to go through all of them. And the amount of data that it analyzes 100% every month is 5 different databases and 2,600 records per month. And these results are executed monthly, and we share it with management. Okay, nepotism. The objective is to evaluate relationships of GCRTA employees and looking for conflicts in reporting structure. Some of the tests that we do are shared addresses, shared bank accounts, shared contacts, shared beneficiaries, and self-reported. And those are the ones that if someone's hired, they fill out a form with HR and they self-report who they're related to. And one of the things that we added to this is a past reported. And what it does, it takes all those other relationships and it stores them in a database we call past reported. And the reason we do this, I'm going to pick on my son, he worked here last summer. He shows up as a shared address and he shows up as a beneficiary. If he were to ever come back and move out and get his own house, he wouldn't show up under shared address. and he would not show up under beneficiary, and if for some reason he failed to self-report, none of these tests would actually catch him. But because we created the past reported database, it would catch him and he'd get reported.
Is that the recommendation of audit, to have him in a different address?
He's a great kid. I'll take him.
Yeah. Well, he graduates this year, so maybe he'll move. And the scope of this uses more databases than any other one, because you can see each one of these address, bank accounts, contacts, beneficiaries are all stored in different databases. So it uses 9 databases, and it goes through about 4,700 records every month to do this. So this is shared with management every month. And go to the next slide. Okay, now with continuous audit, we've been running it for a while, so it's kind of matured, and it's been improved a lot. That took a lot of the manual effort out of it, so it's freed up a lot of my time to actually focus on some new objectives, which are the create accounts payable script, the create the fuel expense script, which is the first thing I talked about, enhance reporting and visualizations, and what I envision with this is a real-time dashboard that's on the RTA intranet that management or anybody can view at any time. Fair reconciliation, because I've looked at some of the reporting that comes out of that, is very data intensive, so I think that's a good candidate for continuous audit. And the payroll cross-referencing timekeeping systems, and that's looking at, I believe it's HASTIS, and looking at the work that's logged into HASTIS to make sure it kind of stays in tune with what's in the payroll system. And that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions? And with that, I think, Tony, I think you're on next.
Okay, we're closing out here. In terms of special requests, emerging issues, we continue to look at the internal affairs process review at Transit Police. It's in progress. We had another request from Human Resources to take a look at salary non-bargaining, non-exempt, that's an employee type, comp time. So we're doing an analysis for HR. External, did I pass one? Okay. External audit coordination. The state auditor is on site, wrapping up some of their field work. The board should expect an audit report, draft report in executive session, working with the Raja's group in accounting, and I think that's expected to be, or scheduled for June, right? Okay. The State of Ohio Department of Transportation is in here at least every quarter, if not on a surprise basis, unannounced basis, with Rail Safety Oversight Program. And for information, they're being audited. The auditor is being audited, okay? The state ODOT consultant is being audited by the feds, and we will cooperate with them through the State Safety Oversight Triennial Review. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the feds, the Federal Transit Administration, is doing a project management oversight review of the rail car replacement project. So it's our responsibility to coordinate and minimize duplication of efforts if we can, and to help control some costs from outside vendors. Status of outstanding follow-up. All internal audit results recommendations are monitored and tracked in our audit management system, and we will verify them before they're closed, all open recommendations. That's one of our standards you see at the bottom. Other projects, we will, working with procurement, to engage a healthcare expense claims auditor to support us with the healthcare benefits program, taking a look at how our third-party administrators are processing our claims and charging us for, in accordance with our self-insurance program. Internal audit is engaged in other activities, such as we maintain a fraud hotline. We're members of the Information Technology Council, the Change Order Review Committee, and some of these other committees that are formed by management, so we can learn about risk and we can share some of our broad knowledge. We have a pretty intensive staff training program. We're engaged in all the local chapters the Institute of Internal Audit, the Information Systems Auditors, the Certified Fraud Examiners, and they sponsor a lot of training that we attend each quarter. And to wrap up, one of our primary risks at the organization, one of our focuses this year is cybersecurity. So in December, we had the ransomware readiness assessment where the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, arm of the federal government, came in, did that ransomware readiness assessment, shared the results with management, and management has developed an action plan to implement some of their recommendations. We plan to bring them back in to do an external dependency management assessment. That's basically evaluating when we're moving some of our systems into the cloud. So that doesn't relieve us from some of the risk. So we're going to be taking a look at some of those external dependencies. And then a cyber resilience assessment, both forthcoming, hopefully in 2024, maybe in 2025. And you know, this is a slide to basically capture that. This is the internal risk assessment team. So in addition to the CISA, the group I just spoke of, we have members from information technology, okay, transit police, legal, and us. And there's a focused effort on cybersecurity amongst all those different departments. And then as India reported out in her last general manager's presentation at the board, we held a tabletop drill in April, okay, where we had some escalating scenarios to test our readiness, capture lessons learned, and we are going through a lessons learned and implementation for continuous improvement at this point. With that, that concludes our audit committee presentation for the quarter. And if you have any other questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Any final questions or comments from members? Yes.
I have one question going back to the ongoing work with the Easy Fare system. I know at the committee meeting earlier this month, we learned about the scanners that are coming in. Is that something that you guys are engaged in? Is that part of the scope of that piece of work, or could you give a little more detail about that?
Certainly on the Easy Fare, there's several components to that. There's the validator that's installed, on board vehicles and our stations, and then the mobile app that our customers can then use. So we do a functional test. Is all of our fare media or tickets, are we charging the right amount of money? Are we receiving the cash? Do those phones, does a customer's phone validate properly in the system, tracing the transaction back to the central database? So we are involved in ongoing testing for functional testing of the equipment. There's still some equipment that's yet to be installed, okay, and there's a focused effort by our IT department to do that. And then as Randy mentioned, as well as Andrew, we're working on developing an Easy Fare continuous audit that mirrors what we're doing on the onboard revenue collection, where Randy was reporting out that anything greater than 2% variance that's collected and deposited, we start looking into. So we'll have that same kind of continuous audit of the Easy Fare system once we get that script up and running.
Anyone else? Great. Well, thank you again for a very complete overview of the quarter's activities, and appreciate, as we discussed yesterday, just looking at how we can, this is a great format, but just ways to continue to make it more informative, and so I look forward to working with both of you on that. And if there's nothing else, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion Welch.
Second, Mersman.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.